They are, Adam, responsible for what they broadcast on national television, paid by you and me, the license fee payer. And it was totally inappropriate for them to broadcast death chants on national TV. I've been to Glastonbury and I've had a tour of the BBC studios there, and they very proudly showed me that they can stop inappropriate speech. They've got mechanisms to do that, and they ought to use them, and they didn't in this case. And that was an absolutely wrong decision.
There were chants yesterday of death to the IDF, led by Bob Vylan at last night's Glastonbury festival. And in the last few minutes, Emily Eavis, who is in charge of Glastonbury, has said the chants were, quotes, very much crossed the line, and we're reminding people that there's no place for anti-Semitism, hate speech or incitement to violence at the festival. There have been immediate condemnations of what went on, and the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has acted to speak to the BBC Director General, Tim Davie. Well, let's get the views of a former Culture Secretary, Lucy Frazer, who was in the job between 2023 and 2024 in the Sunak administration. Hello, Lucy Frazer.
Hi, Adam.
What do you think the BBC's got to answer about this? I mean, they're not responsible for organising the festival or for the people who perform at it.
But they are, Adam, responsible for what they broadcast on national television, paid by you and me, the license fee payer. And it was totally inappropriate for them to broadcast death chants on national TV. I've been to Glastonbury and I've had a tour of the BBC studios there, and they very proudly showed me that they can stop inappropriate speech. They've got mechanisms to do that, and they ought to use them, and they didn't in this case. And that was an absolutely wrong decision.
But, I mean, they did, for example, cut back on the coverage of Kneecap, another controversial group. They say they're not going to show what Mr. Vylan said again. I mean, that's perfectly responsible. I mean, is it really that, in the culture wars, the BBC and the Glastonbury Festival are on the other side from the Conservative Party?
This is not a culture war. And I think to suggest that it is downgrading what has happened and the responsibility that the BBC has. What was said was a death chant. If somebody on stage had said death to the British Army or to the Ukrainian Army, then the BBC, I suspect, would have cut the feed. What they cannot do is broadcast stirring up racial or religious hatred, or at least pause and consider whether that is appropriate. And I think that they took the wrong decision in this case.
But I mean, you say it's not a culture war, but there is a perception. I mean, you're not responsible for what they say on the Mail on Sunday, but here's Sarah Vines saying Glastonbury, it's turned into a Davos for rich hippies and hypocrites. We understand that many in the audience joined in those hateful chants. I mean, there is a very strong opinion, isn't there? Maybe a minority opinion, but certainly held very strongly, that there should be firmer support for the Palestinians in this country.
Of course, the Palestinians, there's a terrible situation, a tragic situation that's going on in Israel. And of course, that is the subject of political debate, and people have very strong issues on it. But what we're talking about here is the BBC's responsibilities in relation to its broadcast. I mean, if you want to talk wider, what's its responsibilities in relation to this war as a whole, and the positions that is adopted throughout and since October the 7th show a clear bias. And, they refuse to call Hamas terrorists. They put on air a programme which was largely featuring, its main character was the son of a Hamas associated leader. And now they have not taken down death chants to the IDF. And they say on each occasion they apologise. On each occasion they say that they're going to investigate, but nothing changes. And in fact, no investigations come to any final reviews. I haven't seen the outcome of any of those reviews on the issues that I've just identified.
As you know, politicians have different views on this. I was speaking to the former Labour cabinet minister Peter Hain about this, and I just want to put to you one reaction from one of our listeners who says, "Thank God for Peter Hain's voice of sanity over Glastonbury. This performative hand-wringing from politicians who should know better is pitiful to watch. Grow up, ignore it and move on." What do you say to that?
I think lots of people have strong opinions, and we live in a world where, of course, we can debate. But I think we should consider what has happened here. And what's happened here is on stage, broadcast by the BBC, you had a death chant, which was inciting murder, which the police are saying that they're looking at to see whether any criminal offences were committed.
Well, it should be said we are drawing attention to this incident as well. So, Lucy Frazer, thank you very much indeed for your insight.
Glastonbury, it's been embroiled in an anti-Semitism row after one of the acts, Bob Vylan, chanted death, death to the IDF during their set yesterday. We're not going to talk about Kneecap, who also performed, although it wasn't live streamed on the BBC, because there is an active court case surrounding that group. So we're not going to discuss that, but we're going to focus on the comments made by Bob Vylan. And I wonder what you think here, Paul, about this, because some people are saying to say that, and the comments that were also made by Bob Vylan about "we've all worked for Zionists" is inflammatory, it's incitement, and it's anti-Semitic. Would you agree with that?
Totally, totally. I mean, I've got an absolute sense of foreboding. I have for a little while now, but especially what I have read about overnight from Glastonbury, because if you just take it from the idea of youthful exuberance, and I'm just taking this at the mild end for a second, then what you're doing is you're just fueling the agents provocateurs, to whom most people in Glastonbury probably think is a lingerie company, rather than people who are agitating against society. You're also, they are helping bring people like a reform government closer together, the kind of government those kind of people would absolutely loathe because of their agitation. But in reality, it's not just youthful exuberance. It's so much more than that. It's ironic. This was at a music festival. And of course, we know what happened at the Supernova Festival in Israel, where people were being killed, they were being raped, they were being held hostage, and they were hiding amongst the dead, where they were trying to enjoy themselves. This is the disparate approach that we're having here. And it's just totally lost on people who really have no grasp of the situation, but are agitating others.
Sam, where are you on this?
I mean, I have to say I'm sufficiently old that prior to this furore, I'd never heard of Bob Vylan, of course, and that, in a sense, is the victory for them. On this particular one, I think it's a very tricky situation. It's something that we all abhor. We don't want to hear language that incites possibly racial hatred or incites anti-Semitism. And the BBC is now embroiled in a new row over what they should or shouldn't have foreseen and what they should or shouldn't have done. But when it comes down to it, I feel the same hint of menace that Paul is speaking about, that a group of young people are watching somebody shouting a chant of that nature, and then also actually posting on Twitter about Zionism and vegan ice cream, which also is a hate crime of some kind. And that really is a situation that is heady in the current climate and very worrying.
Sam, you, of course, in a previous life were a BBC producer, so you got a little bit of knowledge about kind of like the decisions within the organisation. And one of the things that people have raised is there was a decision not to live stream Kneecap's performance, but they did live stream on the red button the performance by Bob Vylan. And for 40 minutes, that live stream of the performance continued after the comments made initially. What would the thinking be at the BBC? I mean, why would that not have been pulled? Why wouldn't someone not have identified that more comments could be made, for example?
I think it's a great question, and that really is where it comes down to accountability for the BBC on this particular issue. Look, I have been a very junior producer, dealing with lots of things coming in, and, I don't want to place blame on any particular individual, but that 40 extra minutes, the point at which I'm sure, and I know Peter used to be a BBC producer as well, we would have done something to pull down that being covered, that continuing, that period afterwards. I think there are questions to answer on. It's an extremely unfortunate situation, and it continued to go on for a long period of time. And that is really where I suspect that the gaze will fall on the BBC and that poor individual producer who, with just a Google search or two, would have known that perhaps this particular group might have something contentious and difficult to say.
Of course, the BBC did put a warning out when they played it. They said that it was going to issue a warning on screen about the strong and discriminatory language. Paul, where do you think the potential fault lies here? I mean, how much criticism can there be for the BBC for live streaming this? But how much is really with Glastonbury for giving a platform to these groups?
Well, I think you've got to start with Glastonbury, basically. You've got a guy who is a Corbynista that is just helping to reportedly dodge £80 million of inheritance tax through. So the dichotomy is...
We don't know that, Paul. Don't get us in trouble.
But I mean, like, in terms of how he's structuring his company, is not exactly symptomatic of what you'd expect a Corbynista to be doing, put it like that. And so... and then you've got the fact that they're talking about, there's no barriers there. This is one of the most secure places in the country, which actually I was quite glad that you had all of those kind of people surrounded by, I didn't have to worry about them for 4 or 5 days while they're locked up in Glastonbury. But this is just effectively... giving a platform. Can you imagine if you were Jewish and you were in the middle of in the crowd there? It must have been absolutely contemptible. You look at the speakers list there as well of the people there. There are some former BBC people there. There are a few politicians, but they're all of a particular type, talking about tapping the far right whilst they're actually shouting death chants over on one of the other stages. The dichotomies are all over the place.
And of course, Sam, some people will say the right to free speech. Clearly, the police are analysing this footage to see whether any offences have been caused. But some people, some of our listeners have got in touch today talking about the lack of consistency, if you like, that some people, were tweeting last year after the riots. It was considered incitement and they ended up in prison. And yet you've got a group standing on a stage at Glastonbury, which is being live streamed on the BBC, making these kinds of remarks.
I mean, you're absolutely correct. The inconsistency is interesting. I mean, I myself, many decades ago, used to be a criminal defence barrister. And of course, the criminal law has moved so much with the times that you will now find someone tweeting about the riots last year that you mentioned being incarcerated. And you could theoretically, if the police, think that there is the level, find a similar situation here with something happening after they've reviewed the material. But that inconsistency is really troubling for people, I think, for 2 reasons. One, lack of clarity about what constitutes freedom of speech and what constitutes criminal behaviour. And also, some might say, a particular looming concern that when things are said about one group, there are different actions to when they are said about this specific group. And that, of course, raises another issue about concerns about anti-Semitism more widely. So those 2 inconsistencies, I think, are troubling for people looking at this case.
Paul, and they've also put the police and the CPS, if needed, in a really invidious position, because as Sam says, if they don't act, then they are just, giving succor to the Lucy Connolly protesters about her sentence and other people's sentence. If they do act, then they're just radicalising a further group of people that may be in the crowd at Glastonbury or are looking in.
Well, there is a statement from Avon and Somerset Police. We are aware of the comments made by acts on the West Holt stage at Glastonbury Festival. Video evidence will be assessed by officers to determine whether any offences may have been committed that would require a criminal investigation. Well, Paul,